Hey, welcome to the science communication portion of our program. So what I'm trying to do here is to familiarize you with the basic structure of what we're doing and why we're doing it. No matter what you do with science, whether you end up being a teacher or someone who works with a government agency or, someone who actually is doing research in some sort of fashion, you're going to have to do science communication. And so let's talk about what we're going to cover. Basically, every form of science communication we're going to hit on at least a little. So scientific writing, poster presentations, and oral presentations. And in this, I'm covering formal oral presentations as well as talks that you give to the general public. So I'm sure that some of you will be thinking, hey, I already know how to do this. Why should I have a class in this? And it's true that most of you have done assignments that are very similar to what I'm talking about, in which you have to make a poster or you have to write a paper. But what I've seen is that a lot of times when you're given these assignments, your instructor will say, here's a list of what you need to put in your introduction. Here's how you write a methods section. And then they sort of leave you to figure out how to do it. And that's not the way I'm approaching this. So, for example, as we do our scientific writing, you're going to have focused exercises to help you master each section of a paper. So, for example, we're going to spend an entire week taking instructions on how to do a procedure and turning that into how you would write it in a method section of a paper. So that's the idea of what we're trying to do here. What you're going to do as a project is you're going to write a scientific paper. Now, I mean, in an ideal world, this would have been, with the data that you collected yourself. But since we are limited in terms of not being able to do lab work this quarter, you're either going to be using data that we collected last quarter, if you feel comfortable with statistical analysis, which I know some of you have had stats. If you haven't, what we're going to do is we're going to have you take a poster that you find online from a scientific conference where hopefully they have done the statistical analysis for you, and you can take that and expand it into a poster, because there's usually a lot of research that goes into turning a poster into a paper. And then poster presentations are very common. If you end up, for example, doing a surf over the summer this year, you will be asked to give a poster presentation at the end. And so there's a lot of fine tuning that goes into how to make a poster, how to format it, how do you think through the creation of a poster, what are the best practices? In other words, how do you make your poster easy to read, easy to understand, even if you're not there to explain what's on the poster. And we will talk a little bit about accessible design. And then how do you actually present your poster in a poster session? So we'll talk through all that, and you'll get to present your poster virtually over Zoom. Yay! So what we're going to do here, again, you don't have a data set that you are going to generate, but we're going to have you take a published paper, and again, you're going to be able to choose any paper you want. I do recommend that if there's a paper that you found last quarter when you were doing research on your project proposal, that you might want to do something like that. Okay, so now let's talk about formal scientific communication. We are going to think about how to present at a conference. So at a conference, you're either going to be presenting a poster or doing an oral presentation. And when you do speak in this way, it's a very formal, structured way of presenting. It's not always presenting at a conference, though. So I've had students who have had to present to the EPA, which was our funding agency, and it was a similarly structured sort of talk. So just know that even if you never go to a conference, you may still have to do this sort of work. And then your assignment, of course, is to turn something into a presentation. Again, not your data, but we're going to have you work on a paper, and it will be a different paper than the one you're doing for a poster. So you're just keep in mind that you're going to have to be looking for 2 papers that you're perhaps really excited about, so that you could present to the class. And then finally, we're going to talk about informal science communication. Right? You saw when we were doing the broader impact statements in our project proposals last quarter, that funding agencies really do want you to get out and interface with the public. And so it's good to know how to do that, because you can't present your science to the public the way that you do to a trained scientist. Like, if you're going to talk about your project, would you explain it the same way to an 8-year-old, right, as you would to a high school student? I mean, of course you wouldn't. The high school student hopefully has had more of a scientific background. They just have a better understanding of the world in general. And, let's even take it a step further. Someone who has perhaps the same education as a high school student, but has more life experience, would also interact with that material differently. And so you have to structure it differently for different age groups, right? And so thinking through, how do you explain concepts is actually a way to understand how well you really know the material. If you can explain it 4 different ways at 4 different levels, that's how you know that you really, really understand what you're doing. And so your assignment here, we unfortunately can't do Science Carnival the way that we normally do Science Carnival, but we're talking about doing a virtual Science Carnival, where you present as though you're presenting to children, and then you will have the option to have that recorded and have it put on YouTube, and then we can open that to the public as our virtual Science Carnival. So what you've seen here in this thing is the big assignments that we're doing, that we're working on, and you will be working on all of these assignments sort of simultaneously, in that, for example, when we talk about methods, you'll be writing a method section for a paper, and you'll be writing a method section for your poster, and you'll be working on the method section of your presentation. So we're sort of going to be working on these all together, but there's also going to be smaller assignments where we say, okay, here is something that you did in lab, for example, let's turn that into a methods section blurb, and all of you are going to work on the same thing, and then you can do peer review and talk about, what's necessary to put in, what can you leave out. So you will have smaller assignments that are due twice a week. And so you're going to have multiple assignments due per week, where we're first going to work on, okay, here's the structure of how we do this. And now your job for the weekend is to go in and work on a methods thing for your paper, for your poster, etc., etc. Okay. So that's where we're going. What I want you to do is first watch the next video, which is going to talk about how to get ready for our first class on Thursday. And second, to start thinking about, of all the papers you read, are there any 2 that you would like to turn into a poster or an oral presentation? So that's your job. And now follow the link to the next video.